Hi, my name is Rowan. I'm 31 years old, and for as long as I can remember, the soundtrack of my life has been one line played on repeat. Why can't you be more like your brother Seth? If you grew up standing in somebody else's spotlight, you know how that phrase can turn into a low, electrical hum in your skull. Always there, even when the room is quiet. And before we go any farther, I'm curious. Were you the golden child or the one stuck polishing someone else's gold? Drop the word shadow down in the comments if you've ever felt like the family understudy who never gets to step on stage. My first clear memory of the disparity hits at age 7. A sticky July afternoon when my dad rolled home on a rumbling motorcycle he'd surprised Seth with for his 15th birthday. It was cherry red, freshly waxed, and twice the size of my entire body. Dad handed over the keys like he was crowning a prince. Meanwhile, I was still stuffing pennies into a jar for a plastic model plane, and Mom told me I should be grateful Seth might let me sit on the bike when he's not busy. Even then, something in me cataloged the moment like a librarian slotting a book. Exhibit A, things that belong to Seth. That set the tone for the next 2 decades. Every report card that floated across our kitchen table came with a comparison. Seth's A-pluses were proof he was headed for greatness. My A- was room for improvement. His touchdowns were local paper worthy. My relay medals gathered dust in a drawer nobody opened. I swear if Seth had sneezed in tune, my parents would have called the symphony to schedule an audition. But it wasn't just trophies or grades. It was how casually he took what mattered to me because he knew the fallout would always land on my side of the fence. When my uncle mailed me a brand new sketchbook from Italy, a real leather-bound one that smelled like cedar and possibility, Seth borrowed it for a school project and brought it back with the middle pages ripped out for graffiti practice. Dad shrugged, Mom chided me for being too attached to objects, and Seth winked like we shared an inside joke. That wink became his signature move, a tiny, private taunt reminding me the rules bent in his direction. By high school, I developed what therapists now call learned smallness. I mastered the art of slipping through hallways without bumping into Seth's entourage. He was varsity everything. I was the lanky kid who designed the basketball posters but never shot a free throw. The weird thing is, I didn't hate him then. I hated the system that graded us on a curve tilted in his favor, and I hated the part of me that wondered if the curve was right. Here's the kicker, and maybe you'll relate. Even when you know you're playing a rigged game, part of you still hopes to win a round. Senior year, my art teacher nominated one piece for statewide competition. I spent 3 months layering watercolor washes, losing sleep, and actually letting myself picture Dad bragging about me at the dinner table. The evening they announced finalists, Seth burst through the door waving a trophy from yet another football tournament. My parents were mid-cheer when I said, "I placed 3rd." Mom clapped politely, said, "That's nice, dear," and turned back to Seth asking if the trophy matched the living room shelf. I stapled that moment to my heart as Exhibit B, effort is invisible in a brother's shadow. Before you decide this is just a sob story, let me confess something. That ongoing neglect forged a stubborn streak I didn't know I possessed. Every slight, every casual dismissal piled up like gym weights, and lifting them made me strong in quiet ways. I learned to self-validate because nobody else was handing out approval. I learned to observe because fading into the background gives you front-row seats to human nature. Most of all, I learned patience. Seth sprinted through life scooping up immediate wins. I played the long game, storing energy the way a battery stores charge. If you've been through something similar, here's a question to mull over. Did adversity make you shrink or sharpen? Let me know below because your story might be the nudge somebody else needs tonight. Now, don't get me wrong. Family therapy would have been cheaper than the chaos that eventually unfolded, but therapy requires recognition that something's broken. In our house, the narrative was, Seth is stellar, Rowan is sensitive, sensitivity is weakness, end of discussion. Whenever I tried to explain how it felt, Mom would tilt her head like I was speaking another language and say, "We love you both the same, honey," which translated to, "We love you both, but we adore Seth." One Thanksgiving stands out like a bruise. I was 19, home from community college with a portfolio I was genuinely proud of, digital illustrations of our neighborhood reimagined as futuristic skylines. I set them up in the den, waiting for a compliment. Seth sauntered in with his business school application and read it aloud while Mom dabbed her eyes, declaring she could see the CEO already. Dad nodded along, eyes shining with a pride I'd never tasted. Nobody even noticed my prints propped against the wall. After dinner, Seth used the back of one to jot fantasy football pics. I didn't stop him. I just filed Exhibit C, dreams are disposable if they are Seth's. So where's the lesson in all this early injustice? Strangely enough, it's that injustice can incubate clarity. Because when the time came, years later, for me to decide whether to keep swallowing Seth's cruelty or push back, those mental files reminded me how heavy silence can be. They whispered, remember the bike, remember the sketchbook, remember the print torn in half. You've carried their weight long enough. I'm sharing these snapshots not to wallow, but to underline something practical. Resentment is like interest on a loan. Ignore it and the balance doubles. Acknowledge it and you can start paying it down. At 17, I started making tiny payments. I applied for a part-time job at an indie print shop downtown, saved enough to buy second-hand software, and taught myself advanced digital rendering. Each new skill felt like chipping off a piece of that mountain labeled, "You'll never measure up." By 21, while Seth was flexing in fraternity photos, I was landing small freelance gigs, designing gig posters for punk bands and menu art for food trucks. Looking back, I realized that work ethic was fueled less by ambition and more by spiteful hope. If talent didn't impress my parents, maybe a paycheck in my own name would. Spoiler alert, it didn't. But it impressed me, and that was a pivot point. When I got my first check, $280 for a brewery mural, I treated myself to a street cart taco and made a private vow. From now on, I validate me. If you've ever crossed that psychological line where external praise stops being oxygen, you know it's a heady freedom. Still, the family dynamic didn't magically improve. Dad's compliments for Seth grew as reliably as mold on bread, while my successes were nice hobbies. Seth continued his casual pillaging of my belongings, borrowed clothes that never returned, a mountain bike accidentally left in the rain, even a high school girlfriend who drifted toward his gravitational pull after one of his legendary pool parties. By then, I'd built up scar tissue thick enough to feel numb. I told myself losing Claire was a blessing, because we clearly wanted different things. In truth, I just didn't have energy to fight someone who wielded charm like a sword anyone else would hand him. Which raises another reflective question for you watching. Have you ever convinced yourself something didn't hurt simply because you were tired of bleeding? Type num if that rings a bell. You're not alone in that self-defense lie. Through all of this, one figure kept me steady, my best friend Dane. He was the kid who preferred basement LAN parties to varsity games, the one person who acted like my drawings were front-page news. Dane's living room became a sanctuary from the circus. His mom pushed grilled cheese sandwiches across the counter and asked genuine questions about my art. That house smelled like acceptance, burnt cheese and detergent and unconditional regard. If you're lucky enough to have a Dane in your life, text them tonight and say thanks. Trust me, you don't know when you'll need that couch. By the time I hit 25, Seth's resume looked like a stock photo version of success. Business degree, glossy job at Lockridge Capital, a condo with a view, and a Rolex dad co-sign because first impressions matter in finance. My resume looked like a mosaic of creative gigs stitched between a steady but modest agency job. I rented a one-bedroom walk-up with squeaky pipes and covered the beige walls in framed prints. The kind of place you love because you built it, not because anybody else admires it. And here's the insight I wish I could hand teenage Rowan. Comparison is a thief, but it steals only what you leave unattended. The moment I locked my self-worth inside my own approval, comparison had to pick a different pocket. Sure, Dad still raved about Seth's bonuses, and Mom still curated a shrine of his achievements on the mantle, but their scoreboard no longer defined the game I was playing. I had creative freedom, loyal friends, and the slow-burn confidence of someone who knows his character under pressure. Of course, pressure was coming. I couldn't see the avalanche building on the mountain yet, but I could feel tremors. Seth bragging louder at family dinners, my parents casually suggesting I ask him for career advice, little criticisms about how artists don't make real money, slipping into conversation like knives hidden in birthday cake. Each remark made a tiny crack in my resolve, and in those cracks resentment seeped back like rainwater. Only this time, the water was colder, and it was pooling for a storm that would drench us all. That, in a nutshell, is the stage I stood on the night the real betrayal happened. The night Seth opened my front door without permission and rearranged my future like furniture he intended to keep. But before the carnage, before the heartbreak, before the headline-worthy twist you clicked on this video to hear, there was a kid sketching futuristic skylines in a notebook too nice for classroom graffiti. There was a teenager pushing lawn mowers to buy a mountain bike he'd ride twice before it bent under someone else's weight. And there was a young man quietly teaching himself hard skills so that one day, when push finally collided with shove, he'd have the tools to flip the story. So if you're mid-shadow right now, if every dinner table feels like a performance review you didn't ask for, remember this. Your patience can be a bank. Every slight is a deposit. At some point, you may decide it's time to make a withdrawal. And whether that comes in the form of success, distance, or something a little more dramatic, you'll be surprised how heavy the interest can feel in your hands. Stick around, because the next act is where that interest starts to pay out in ways none of us saw coming. If you'd asked me last year what peace looked like, I would have pointed to a Saturday morning in my apartment when Noel and I were still good. She'd be perched at the kitchen counter, bare feet swinging, editing briefs on her laptop while I added ink to a skyline sketch taped against the window for light. The fridge hummed, the coffee smelled like burnt caramel, and the only competition in the room was who could make the other laugh first. That small, ordinary life tasted like victory because it was mine, something Seth hadn't stamped his initials on. Funny how you can think a castle is secure until you find the first hairline crack. Noel and I met the way movie tropes say artists meet. I'd hung a series of Night Street illustrations at a cafe, and she stopped long enough to tilt her head and trace the lines with her finger. I threw out a clumsy opener about coffee stains looking like galaxies. She countered with a lawyer's grin that said, "I'll allow it." And by the time the barista shouted her vanilla latte, we'd booked a real date. She was whip-smart, sarcastic in the harmless way that keeps conversation sharp, and she could dismantle my imposter syndrome with one line. "Rowan, self-doubt is just imagination wearing a cheap suit." For 2 years, we built rituals, Taco Truck Tuesdays, Sunday night horror movies, sticky notes on the mirror with amateur poetry. I won't pretend it was perfect. Money talks got tense and my need to save clashed with her itch to upgrade. But every relationship has a seesaw, right? Cue the Tuesday in October, gray sky, drizzle painting the sidewalks silver. Work had piled on revisions, and by 3 o'clock I decided to do the romantic cliché. Duck out early, swing by the Italian market, and cook Noel's comfort meal, pesto pasta with too much garlic and a side of homemade bruschetta. I texted Dane a smug photo of the basil bunch and wrote, "Watch me earn fiancé points tonight." He replied with a gif of a thumbs-up exploding into confetti. I'm still not sure why I kept my phone on silent after that. Maybe the universe tried to call in a warning and I missed it. I pushed open our apartment door balancing groceries, humming some cheesy pop hook, and the first thing I noticed was an extra pair of men's shoes by the mat, glossy leather Oxfords that looked allergic to discount racks. My brain flicked through possibilities. Delivery guy? Landlord. But the second thing I noticed was 2 half-empty wineglasses on the coffee table, a bottle of the Prosecco I'd been saving for our anniversary already sweating out condensation. And then her laugh. Except the register was different, thinner, like someone trying to sing harmony on a song they barely knew. Followed by a voice that prickled my spine. Seth, in full confident drawl, saying, "That's more like it." I crept down the hall, my pulse pounding so loud I couldn't hear the floor creak. The bedroom door was halfway shut. Through the gap I saw Noel sitting on our duvet in nothing but one of my old graphic t-shirts, knees tucked up, her lipstick smudged in a way I'd never seen on her. Seth lounged beside her, shirt open, watch glinting like a prison searchlight. He raised the wineglass in a mock toast, toward the wall, not knowing I was there, and said, "To trading up." There's a moment just before a car crash where time slows and the noise drops out. You spot the impact coming yet can't will your limbs to move. That's what those 5 seconds felt like, sensory anesthesia. I'd love to tell you I burst in and delivered an epic monologue, but the groceries just slid out of my hands and clattered to the floor. The sound snapped their heads around. Seth's eyes widened for a heartbeat, surprise, then delight. Like a magician thrilled the rabbit finally popped from the hat. Noel's face went blank, then curled into something harsher than guilt, pity mixed with boredom. "Well, if it isn't the early bird," Seth said, swinging his feet to the carpet, completely unfazed by half-dressed reality. "Roomy, you should have texted." He actually called me Roomy in my own apartment. Noel bit her lip, not in shame, but like she'd tasted sour milk. "Rowan, you weren't due till 6, she said, as though I'd violated a meeting invite. I remember staring at the crushed basil leaves by my shoe, thinking of how many tiny decisions had led here, every compromise, every time I'd swallowed annoyance to keep the peace. Seth stepped closer, draping an arm around my shoulders so I could smell his cologne mixing with Noel's perfume. "Relax, man," he murmured, voice thick with condescension. "We're actually doing you a favor. Noel deserves a partner who can provide." His fingers tightened in a brotherly squeeze that felt more like a headlock. "You've always been the creative type, but real life takes capital." The words didn't hurt as much as Noel's laugh. She walked to the closet and began yanking my clothes from hangers, dropping them in a heap. I'm tired of living like we're in a college starter kit, she said. Your brother understands ambition. Every item landing on the floor sounded like an auctioneer's gavel. Sold, sold, sold. She picked up the framed photo of us from a beach trip, sunset orange, both of us smiling without irony. With a flick of her wrist, she let gravity shatter it. The glass cracked exactly at the midpoint between our faces. I could practically hear a director yell, "Symbolism cut." I felt something in my chest fold in on itself, an origami swan turning back into a plain sheet of paper. The old Rowan, the one trained to make himself small, would have grabbed the clothes and apologized on his way out. But trauma teaches you geography, and I was suddenly done living on borrowed land. I met Seth's smug gaze and leaned so close he had to loosen his grip or look like he was hugging me. "Congrats," I whispered. "You finally found a way to impress yourself." I spent the next 10 minutes packing with mechanical calm. Laptop, external drive, sketchbooks, toothbrush. Seth lounged on the bed narrating my movements like a sports commentator. Noel leaned in the doorway scrolling her phone, maybe live tweeting the humiliation. When I zipped my backpack, Seth tossed me my apartment keys, already removed from the ring, and said, "Don't forget these, actually wait, we'll need them." In the hallway, he handed me a grocery bag containing 2 shirts and a pair of socks. "Left some of your bits out here. Anything still around tomorrow gets donated." He winked, the same wink from childhood, only now aged into pure contempt. Then he shut the door. I heard the deadbolt slide, and for reasons I can't explain, thought about how that door squeaked last winter and I'd oiled the hinge. My brain offered nonsense as comfort. At least they'll enjoy a quiet close. Rain greeted me like a punchline. I walked until asphalt blurred into a gray ribbon and my phone buzzed against my leg. It was a text from Seth. "Hope the couch at Dane's is comfy. Thanks for warming Noel up for me." For the first time since graphic-teed betrayal, anger outpaced shock. I typed a reply, deleted it, then powered the phone off. Some fires don't deserve oxygen. Dane's studio apartment could fit inside Seth's living room, but that couch felt like stepping onto solid ground after a shipwreck. Dane cracked a soda, slid it over, and didn't ask a single leading question. I spoke when words unfroze. Each sentence felt like pulling barbed wire through my throat, yet Dane just nodded and occasionally muttered, "Dude, that is rough." No silver linings, no motivational poster talk, just witness. If you've ever had someone do that for you, drop their initials below. Give them a silent shout-out. Night merged into early morning. I lay staring at the ceiling plaster, counting obstacles ahead. Rent I couldn't cover alone, furniture gone, trust atomized. And under that pile sat humiliation, that sticky residue of knowing the people you love most view you as optional. Around 3, Dane's ceiling fan started squeaking, a soft, repetitive chirp. Every revolution echoed the question, "What now?" I didn't have an answer, but rage quietly filled the silence Seth had occupied my entire life. Rage, but also clarity, the sense that the scoreboard had been reset to 0. I was broke, heartbroken, and technically homeless, yet oddly free. In losing everything Seth believed defined status, I'd lost only the things he could take. What remained were the things he couldn't reach: my craft, my grit, my capacity to start again. Here's the takeaway I wrote in my journal the next morning, still tasting the metallic edge of betrayal. When someone shows you your worth in their eyes, believe them. Then decide if their vision will shape your future or fuel your own. I chose fuel. I'd love to say I bounced back overnight, but movies lie. Over the next days, I forgot to eat, dropped weight, ghosted clients. Image after image of that bedroom replayed in my head. Maybe you know that loop, like your brain stuck buffering the worst scene in the film. If so, type loop below, let others know they're not isolated in that mind trap. A week later, Dane scrolled through Instagram, paused, and turned the screen toward me. Noel and Seth posed at a restaurant I'd saved 3 paychecks to afford last anniversary. She wore a watch I'd planned to surprise her with for Christmas. The caption read, "Leveled up with the better brother." Seth commented, "Hand-me-downs are underrated." Her reply, "Barely used, easily improved." I felt the last ember of hope sigh out, and a cold breeze rushed in. Heartbreak morphed into purpose the night my mom called, voice bright as tinsel, insisting I come home for Sunday dinner. "Family sticks together," she chirped. Funny how betrayal travels faster than truth. Mom knew something had happened, yet framed it as a spat I needed to get over. I nearly refused, but some masochistic streak wanted to measure just how deep the family blindness ran. Spoiler, deep enough to swallow a submarine. Dinner played out like low-budget theater. Mom doting on Seth, Dad nodding like a bobblehead, Noel seated proudly beside Big Brother, necklace sparkling like a trophy. They announced they'd purchased a condo in the very development I'd been saving for. Seth raised a glass to new beginnings. I tasted bile and cardigan casserole. Every so often, Mom's eyes flicked to me, silent commentary. See how well things work out when you aim higher. After dessert, I escaped to Dad's office for air that didn't smell like smugness. That's where the crack widened, the one that would become an earthquake. But that discovery belongs to the story's next stretch. For now, understand the landscape. I'd lost the girl, the apartment, and whatever scraps of parental approval I still craved. In their place grew a new instinct, the same way the body forms callus after repeated friction. And callus, my friend, can become armor. Ever been knocked so flat you could only look up? Tell me about a time you hit that floor and what lifted you again. Your story could map a route for someone still lying there. The night ended with Seth tossing me a lazy grin as I walked out. "Take notes, little bro," he said. "This is what winning looks like." I didn't answer. Inside, I was writing a different definition, one he wouldn't read until it was carved into his record. Rage can be messy fuel, but it burns hot, and I was just warming up. I left my parents' driveway with my stomach twisting like wet laundry in a spin cycle, the glow of their porch light shrinking in the mirror until the house looked small enough to pocket. Which is ironic, because everything that happened next grew out of that tiny knot in my gut. I drove 4 blocks, pulled over, and just sat there watching condensation crawl across the windshield. My hands shook, not out of fear but out of something sharper, the feeling you get when a word sits on the tip of your tongue but refuses to surface. I kept replaying Seth's smug toast, the condo revelation, Mom's proud smile. Part of me wanted to scream, another part wanted to throw up, and the rest just needed oxygen. Instinct told me movement would help, so I punched the steering wheel, muttered a curse, and did the only rebellious act that ever felt safe in our family. I wandered Dad's digital world. Growing up, he'd leave his desktop unlocked all the time. Nobody worried about privacy because what secrets could an elementary school secretary's husband possibly keep? Tonight, though, something about that unlocked screen while I'd been in his office had felt off, like a window left ajar. I needed to know why. So I pointed my car back toward the house, killed the headlights halfway down the block, and coasted to the curb. They were still inside congratulating Seth on being Seth, which meant the study would be empty. The moon was hiding behind clouds, giving me cover as I slipped through the side gate, around the barbecue grill, and in through the sliding glass door we never locked because good neighborhoods don't breed thieves. Tell that to the kid who'd lost half his childhood possessions to the family's crown prince. My sneakers didn't squeak. I'd memorized which floorboards creaked years ago. In the study, Dad's computer screen glowed like a lighthouse. One jiggle of the mouse and the desktop woke up. No password prompt. Old habits die hard. I wasn't looking for anything in particular, just poking around the email client the way you open the fridge when you're not hungry. The subject lines were bone-dry corporate speak. Compliance review Q3, transfer authorization, client meeting minutes. I almost clicked away, but a reply from Seth caught my eye. He'd written, "Linda, the adjusted statements were already delivered to the Wilcox account. Please update your records." Adjusted statements felt like code for something slippery. I opened the thread. Linda Blackwell, apparently a compliance officer, had asked for originals of several client reports. Seth replied with PDFs, assuring her the latest audits reflect our projections. My design brain noticed tiny inconsistencies. Font weights off by half a point, headers nudged a pixel right, margins that shifted halfway through the document. Sloppy work disguised as professional polish is like a forged signature. The ink looks fine until you squint. I dove deeper, searching adjusted, Wilcox, statement, keywords that shouldn't appear together so often. Dozens of emails popped up. The pattern sharpened, Seth sending doctored PDFs to clients and CCing Dad when their printer broke. Dad would print, sign, scan, and forward them back. Maybe he thought he was just helping his successful son with office logistics. I thought of the motorcycle, the high school girlfriend, the condo, except this theft wasn't targeting me. It was siphoning retirement accounts from people who probably counted pennies before ordering dessert. My heartbeat stuttered against my ribs as the pieces aligned. Seth was skimming. Not a couple grand here and there, hundreds of thousands aggregated from multiple accounts. And because the amounts flew under certain thresholds, the firm's automated flags hadn't bleeped yet. I knew enough about design to spot mismatched typography. I knew enough about human nature to recognize greed dressed in a tailored suit. For a minute I just sat there, cursor hovering over a spreadsheet like it might bite. Turning back felt impossible. Moving forward felt nuclear. That's the moral fork no one prepares you for, when justice for strangers means detonating the family myth you've tried your whole life to survive inside. Have you ever faced a choice where every road burned something you cared about? If so, type fork below. Someone scrolling these comments might need to know they're not alone at the crossroads. I copied every suspicious attachment to a fresh USB drive, tucked it in my jacket, and slipped back into the night. A block away, I exhaled so hard my breath fogged the chilly air. I expected relief, but dread hit instead. What if I'd misread everything? What if Seth was running a perfectly legal fee structure? Except legal paperwork doesn't hide typos in the footer or duplicate signature layers in the metadata. My gut said this was rotten. Sleep was futile. I spent the night in Dane's kitchenette scanning PDFs, cross-referencing public SEC filings, and building a folder called What Seth Doesn't Want Anyone to See. Around dawn, Dane shuffled in, hair like a collapsed tent. I filled him in. He whistled low. "Your brother's a villain auditioning for a Scorsese's flick," he said, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "But if you're going to take him down, you have to be surgical. Otherwise he spins it, you look jealous, and nothing sticks." That word, jealous, made my stomach knot. It was the family's default accusation whenever I protested unequal treatment. But I'd stopped being jealous. I was enraged on behalf of people I didn't even know, and maybe that was healthier than rage on behalf of myself. 2 days later, clarity arrived in a different package, a knock at Dane's door. A woman stood there clutching a messenger bag, eyes darting like she half expected me to slam the door. She introduced herself as Jenna, Noel's coworker at the law firm. I remembered meeting her at a holiday party. She'd complimented my tie, said Noel talked about my art all the time. Now she looked like someone delivering a bomb defusal manual. "I shouldn't be here," she said, voice barely above a whisper, "but you deserve context." She perched on the arm of the sofa and launched into a timeline that made my betrayal look quaint. Noel and Seth had been seeing each other for 7 months. They'd joke about how brothers were compare-and-save dadding. Seth bragged in earshot about upgrading models. And last week, Noel convinced Jenna's grandmother, an 80-year-old widow suffering early dementia, to move her retirement fund over to Seth's management because he could double it. That money was everything the woman lived on. I felt heat crawl up my neck. If Seth had stolen from strangers, that was monstrous. Stealing from vulnerable seniors handpicked by Noel for commission was volcanic. Jenna's story snapped the last moral rubber band. I wasn't choosing between family loyalty and truth. I was choosing between complicity and action. The next fortnight felt like living 2 lives. Daylight hours at the agency drafting logos, nights building the most meticulous case of my existence. I bought a burner laptop with cash, signed up for a VPN, and created a nameless email account at a public library Wi-Fi because paranoia is cheaper than consequences. I cataloged every fraudulent transaction, date, account, amount, forged signature, and the luxury purchase Seth made within 48 hours. A new Audi showed up a week after a $28,000 management fee slice. The condo escrow matched a $120,000 withdrawal from an octogenarian's annuity. The Rolex, paid for by a half-hidden rebalancing fee that magically moved funds into a shadow account. Some nights, spreadsheets blurred into confessions. Other nights, guilt stabbed when I pictured Mom sobbing if Seth went to prison. That internal tug-of-war taught me a bitter lesson. Love without boundaries bleeds into enabling. Family can be sacred, but it should never be a sanctuary for crime. That's a truth I wish someone had etched on our refrigerator years ago. I split the evidence into 3 packets, each tailored for different eyes. One for Linda Blackwell in compliance, just enough to confirm her suspicions. One for the state's financial fraud unit, heavy on forged signatures and elder exploitation. And a third for the SEC, everything, plus proof Seth was Googling non-extradition countries and booking offshore flights. Each packet had unique formatting so they couldn't be automatically traced to the same source. I even altered my writing style, formal legalese in one, bullet point analyst tone in another, conversational summary in the third. Call it overkill. I called it insurance against Seth's silver tongue. Dane watched me address envelopes like I was wiring explosives. "You sure you want the nuclear option?" he asked. I pictured Jenna's grandmother signing forms she couldn't read, my parents' savings sitting in the same portfolio, and Seth's grin when he shut my apartment door. "I'm beyond sure," I said. "I'm committed." Before mailing, I triple-checked everything. Mistake here meant Seth walking free and me labeled spiteful. Have you ever held responsibility so heavy your hands felt numb? Drop weight in the chat if that resonates. Your comment may remind someone they're not the only one shouldering invisible cargo. The night I mailed the packets, rain drizzled again, same chilled curtain as the betrayal night, but I welcomed it this time. I walked to 3 different blue mailboxes in 3 different zip codes, dropping evidence like breadcrumbs for justice to follow. The metal chinks as envelopes slid inside sounded final, like the clack of poker chips when you push all in. Then came waiting. A day, 3, a week. I woke every morning expecting a furious call from Seth or worse, Mom sobbing that police had arrived. Instead, silence. Meanwhile, Noel and Seth continued their highlight reel life online, brunch selfies, condo floor plan pics, filters hiding any sign of an oncoming storm. But storms offer no courtesy notifications, they just break. 17 days later, I sat in a cafe 2 cities away sketching a mural concept when Dane's number flashed on my phone. The line crackled with static and adrenaline. "Turn on the news," he blurted. I opened the Financial Channels app. Headline: Local Investment Advisor arrested in Elder Fraud Scheme. There was Seth, wrists cuffed, designer jacket hanging crooked as 2 agents guided him toward a squad car. His expression was the opposite of every smug grin I'd cataloged, confusion bleeding into terror. My pulse didn't race, it slowed. Not triumph, not glee, just the quiet click of a puzzle completed. The broadcast said authorities received anonymous comprehensive documentation. Accounts frozen, firm cooperating, bail set at 1 million. That's when my phone vibrated again. Mom, then Dad, then Noel, calls stacking like unread emails. I let them ring. I needed a minute to file this moment under Exhibit D. Truth weighs more than family myth. Lesson time, and I hope it lands. Exposure isn't vengeance when the perpetrator endangers others. It's responsibility. If someone in your circle harms people and hides behind loyalty rhetoric, remember loyalty without ethics is just fear wearing family colors. What do you think? Does blood excuse betrayal? Sound off below, I'll be reading. That evening the sun slipped beneath rain clouds and smeared the horizon tangerine. I walked along the riverbank and let cold wind whip my face. For the first time in years, the hum in my skull, "Why can't you be more like your brother?" was gone. Maybe because there was no brother-shaped pedestal left to admire. Or maybe because my own voice, steady and unflinching, had finally spoken loud enough to drown it out. Tomorrow would bring fallout, angry voicemails, family implosions, maybe even court summons. But tonight I pocketed my phone, lifted my collar against the wind, and felt the lightness that comes when you choose integrity over inherited silence. I glanced at the river, its surface rough but honest, and whispered to myself, "Let the current take whatever was never mine to carry." The first call that actually pierced my voicemail gauntlet came from Dad at 2 a.m. His voice sounded like gravel soaked in regret. "Your mother's crying. The papers say it's millions. Tell me this isn't real." I lay in Dane's dark apartment, phone glowing against the ceiling, and for once I spoke without the old tremor of wanting approval. "Check your retirement account, Dad, then call me back." An hour later, he rang again. No bluster, no accusations, just stunned breathing. "It's empty," he whispered. For a beat, we shared an unfamiliar silence. 2 men finally acknowledging truths we'd both dodged for decades. I agreed to meet them the next evening at a diner halfway between our towns, neutral ground where heartbreak came with free coffee refills. Mom looked smaller under the fluorescent buzz, mascara tracks cutting valleys down her cheeks. She slid a paper across the table, a statement showing every penny they'd trusted to Seth siphoned into a ghost fund. She asked me how long I'd known. I told her the timeline, the documents, the regulators. She listened, then did something unimaginable. She said she was sorry, not just for ignoring the warning signs, but for every "why can't you be like your brother" I'd absorbed since grade school. Dad's apology was quieter but heavier. He reached across the Formica table and gripped my forearm like a man afraid of drowning. I offered practical help, links to victim restitution programs, contacts at the state board, but I drew a clear line: no loans, no rescuing. I could guide them towards safety but not carry them on my back. Setting that boundary felt like exhaling a 20-year-old breath I'd been holding. The next wave of fallout arrived in a silk-lined storm. Noel. She showed up unannounced outside my office building, clutching a tote bag and sporting a bare face that made her look 12 years older instead of 2. She waited until lunchtime, then cornered me on the sidewalk with the tear-stained script I'd half expected. "Seth lied about everything. I didn't know I'm pregnant." She placed a trembling hand on her stomach, as if the gesture might unlock sympathy like a coin-operated turnstile. I handed her a printout for a women's legal aid clinic and a number for social services housing. "They'll help you file for support once the paternity test is done," I said. Her eyes flashed. "You turn your back on your own blood." I almost laughed. After all these years, the guilt card still came out of the same well-worn sleeve. "My blood is the kid," I replied, "not the adults who gambled lives for condos and likes." She called me cruel. I called her an Uber. Watching it pull away, I felt equal parts sorrow and relief, like setting down an heirloom you never wanted. Seth, meanwhile, refused to fade quietly. The county jail allowed one email per week, and he spent all 300 words painting himself as victim. First message: they set my bail unfairly high, sell the Rolex and help out. I ignored it. Second: think of mom's heart, she can't handle prison visits. I ignored that too. Third: you owe me for ruining my life. I finally hit reply with a single line: your life imploded under its own weight. I just stopped propping up the scaffolding. No further emails came. If you're watching this and wrestling with the ghost rope of obligation, family, partner, friend, pause the video for a second and ask yourself, are you upholding loyalty, or are you acting as unpaid life support for someone unwilling to breathe on their own? Drop the word rope below if that hits. You might inspire someone else to loosen their grip. 4 months crawled by in depositions and restitution hearings. I sat opposite gray-haired retirees who thanked an anonymous teepster for rescuing their savings. They didn't know it was the kid who used to Xerox menus down the street. Each testimony chipped away at any lingering doubt that I'd overreacted. The figure was staggering: $3 million diverted over 3 years. Seth's defense attorney tried to blame administrative oversights. The spreadsheet I'd assembled turned oversights into deliberate incisions. When the judge read out the 12-year sentence, eligible for parole at 8, Seth's jaw flexed like he might bite through regret, but his eyes still scanned the courtroom for someone to rescue him. No one stood. Back outside, reporters fanned microphones my way. I kept walking. The story wasn't about me. Justice, I've learned, is often anonymous labor performed in fluorescent rooms far from camera flashes. Have you ever done the right thing when nobody was looking? Type quiet win in the comments. It's time those small heroic choices got their own spotlight. Life, meanwhile, refused to pause. The agency I'd worked for lost a major client, and I landed an interview at a tech startup creating augmented reality city guides. The CEO skimmed my portfolio, raised an eyebrow at the mural concepts, and hired me as creative director on the spot. Salary doubled, equity on the table, relocation package to a skyline I'd only drawn in daydreams. I signed the offer with a pen that used to sketch in my uncle's leather notebook. Full circle closure. Moving day, Dane smirked while helping load boxes into a rental truck. You realize you're the plot twist now, right? Kid brother turns whistleblowing phoenix. I snorted. More like raccoon, survived on scraps, refused to die, finally found a shiny thing. We bumped fists. If you've got a Dane in your corner, shoot them a thank you text after this video ends. Tell them they're the reason your plot twist was even possible. In the new city, I rented an apartment with brick walls and a balcony view that made sunrise coffee taste like possibility. I decorated minimally, less to lose, more room to grow. Some evenings I'd sit outside, pen in hand, sketching river reflections while podcasts hummed low through the speakers. That's where Mom's first thoughtful letter found me, 3 pages handwritten, admitting she'd started therapy to understand favoritism's fallout. She didn't beg for forgiveness or demand reconciliation. She simply asked to learn how to know me without comparisons. I wrote back that I was open to slow conversations, 1 call a month until trust felt mutual. Setting that pace taught me a lesson worth sharing. Boundaries aren't walls to keep people out. They're speed limits to prevent collisions. Noel's baby arrived midsummer, a girl she named Harmony, irony thick as July humidity. A certified letter forced Seth to acknowledge paternity, and child support payments will draft from his commissary fund once he's released. I sent a small stuffed owl anonymously, tagged for the one innocent in this mess. May you inherit better values than your parents. Maybe she'll never know, but gestures don't always need audiences. Last week on my 32nd birthday, a plain envelope slid under my apartment door, Seth's handwriting again. Inside, a neatly folded sheet and a money order for $200. I figured out how to earn in here, the note read. Thought you could use some cash for art supplies like you used to beg for. I stared at the bill until laughter shook out of me, half amusement, half catharsis. Still transactional even from a concrete cell. I returned the favor by donating the money to a literacy program for incarcerated youth, mailed the receipt back with 2 words: paying forward. Tonight, as I film this final segment, city lights flicker below like low-resolution constellations. I'm holding a glass of sparkling water and the tiniest sprig of basil from a windowsill plant, souvenir of the dinner that never happened. The taste is sharp but fresh, a reminder that bitterness can be seasoning rather than poison if you control the recipe. So what's the moral takeaway after all the rubble? 3 things. First, patience isn't passivity, it's stored velocity. Every slight you endure can fuel decisive action later. Just aim it toward justice, not spite. Second, family is a verb, not a noun. It's actions repeated, choices woven day after day. When those actions harm, you're allowed to redraw the family map. Third, your voice has power even if it shakes. Use it. Someone vulnerable may be waiting for the echo to find their courage. If you've watched this far, I'd love to hear from you. What boundary have you been afraid to set, and what might your life look like if you finally drew that line? Share below, names optional, honesty encouraged. And if this story sparked a light bulb for you, pass it on. Maybe someone stuck in silence needs the flare. I'll sign off with a quote taped above my new drafting table, words that carried me from shadow to skyline. The day you plant the seed is not the day you eat the fruit, but today is still worth planting. Wherever you are, whatever soil you've got, plant something brave. I'll be rooting for you just like you rooted for me.